While I have been involved in tons of research, I am not predominantly a researcher. I am a trainer. I am a training geek, and I admit it. But one of the things that I am passionate about is trying to help people take the science of training and apply it properly so that they can have effective results with the animals that they work with. You can become a phenomenal trainer. And that's what I want to try to do, is help you understand the science and figure out how that might fit into your own personal program. And that's the hardest thing for a lot of people, is they know the science, but they don't always understand quite how to apply it in a practical situation, or how that applies to their particular species or breed of animal or their particular working situation. And I think that most of us who read training books or who go to seminars and go to conferences, like all of you in this room, are probably already on that path. You already are a believer in continuing education. And so hopefully that means that you're really well on your way. I often find that it's the people who don't come to conferences and don't pick up the books and don't see those videos that are often a little bit behind the times. The key to what we're going to talk about today is that final line, strategic implementation. It really is the key to success. Where people fail at using non-food reinforcers is when they fail to do it in a strategic manner and fail to have a good training plan for how they're going to move from food to a toy, or move from food to tactile, or whatever other type of non-food reinforcer is your reinforcer of choice. So let me introduce you to the topic today. There's some key things that I want to talk about. First, what do I mean by non-food reinforcers? I will give you my definition of that. Then I'll talk about why they're important. Probably won't spend too much time there because I think most people already have an idea of why they're important. Then I want to give you some notes about my unique perspective, my background, and the reason I view non-food reinforcers the way that I do. Then I'm going to talk about the topic of secondary reinforcers in quite a bit of depth. That will lead me into a discussion about variable schedules of reinforcement, or at least what people call variable schedules of reinforcement. And I will talk about how we go about evaluating reinforcers, because I think that's the bottom line. We have to be able to evaluate what we're using to determine whether or not it's effective or not. So that's the broad category of topics that we'll talk about between now and lunch. So what is a non-food reinforcer? Well, to me, it is, by definition, a conditioned or learned reinforcer. Something that an animal had to learn to make it reinforcing. It may be something as novel as clapping, or something like toys or tactile or play. The reason non-food reinforcers don't work for us is because they're not as good a reinforcer in the eyes of the animal that you're working with. And you have to make them effective. You have to teach the animal to accept this toy, this tactile clapping, a word, or whatever it is you want to use. You've got to train it. And if you train it right, it can be a potent reinforcer. So, let me give you a few simple definitions that will help us. These are pretty universal definitions, so this shouldn't be mind-boggling for anybody. Primary reinforcer, there's two different definitions that you'll see a lot. One is that it is something that is inherently reinforcing, or the one I like best is that it satisfies a biological need. So what does that mean? Well, that means that things like food, water, sex, shelter, all of those things are primary reinforcers. We tend to look at food because it's something that's easily available that we can apportion out. But there are more than one type of primary reinforcer. What I want to focus on a little bit today is secondary reinforcers. And secondary reinforcers are something that has acquired its reinforcing value because of its association with a primary reinforcer. In other words, it's a learned reinforcer. It is a conditioned reinforcer. But here's the thing. I believe that we can make secondary reinforcers so potent that animals will work hard to achieve and receive secondary reinforcers from us. But it only works if we maintain the value of that conditioned reinforcer. A keep going signal is usually utilized to tell an animal to keep going, but it doesn't mean that you're finished yet. And a lot of people use them. But the point is, it is a secondary reinforcer, and people get confused all the time. In fact, the very first time I remember teaching this in front of a bunch of dog trainers, you'll hear in the videos, now that the sound is working, that I frequently refer to these reinforcement substitutes as a secondary reinforcer. And then on one of these listservs, there was all this chatter about, well, Ken Ramirez doesn't realize that a secondary reinforcer and a clicker are the same thing. Yes, I know they're the same thing, but they are different uses for them. And so to help alleviate confusion, if you hear me say the word secondary reinforcer today, because in my world, when we say secondary reinforcer, we are referring to a reinforcement substitute. If we are referring to a whistle or a clicker, we call it a bridging signal or a marker signal. And so you will hear the word secondary reinforcer used frequently, and for the purposes of the next 3 hours, I mean reinforcement substitute.